The Voyage of the Dwn Trdr, Chapter 1. The Picture in the Bedroom. There was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. His parents called him Eustace Clarence, and masters called him Scrubb. I can tell you how his friends spoke to him, I can't tell you how his friends spoke to him, for he had none. He didn't call his father and mother, but Harold and Alberta. They were very up-to-date and advanced people. They were vegetarians, non-smokers, and teetotalers, and wore a special kind of underclothes. In their house there was very little furniture, and very few clothes on the beds, and the windows were always open. Eustace Clarence liked animals, especially beetles, if they were dead and pinned on a card. He liked books if they were books on information and had pictures of grain elevators or of fat foreign children doing exercises in model schools. Eustace Clarence disliked his cousins, the four Penvances, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. But he was quite glad when he heard that Edmund and Lucy were coming to stay, for deep down inside him he liked bossing and bullying, and though he was a punny little person who couldn't have stood up even to Lucy, let alone Edmund, in a fight, he knew that there are dozens of ways to give people a bad time if you are in your own home and they are the only visitors. Edmund and Lucy did not at all want to come and stay with Uncle Albert, Harold, and Aunt Alberta, but it really couldn't be helped. Father had gotten a job lecturing in America for 16 weeks that summer, and Mother was to go with him because she hadn't had a real holiday for 10 years. Peter was working very hard for an exam, and he was to spend the holidays being coached by old Professor Kirk, in whose house these four children had had wonderful adventures long ago in the war years. If he had still been in that house, he would have had them all there to stay. But he had somehow become poor since the old days, and was living in a small cottage with only one bedroom to spare. It would have cost too much money to take the other three all to America, and Susan had gone. Grown-ups thought her the pretty one of the family, and she was no good at schoolwork, though otherwise old for her age, and Mother said she, quote, would get far more out of a trip to America than the youngsters. Edmund and Lucy tried not to grudge Susan her luck, but it was dreadful having to spend the summer holidays at their aunt's. "But it's far worse for me," said Edmund, "because at least you'll have a room to your own, and I'll have to share a bedroom with that record stinker, Eustace." The story begins on an afternoon when Edmund and Lucy were stealing a few precious minutes alone together, and of course they were talking about Narnia, which was the name of their own private and secret country. Most of us, I suppose, have a secret country, but for most of us it is only an imaginary country. Edmund and Lucy were luckier than other people in that respect. Their secret country was real. They had already visited it twice, and not in a game or a dream, but in reality. They had got there, of course, by magic, which is the only way of getting to Narnia. And a promise, or very nearly a promise, had been made to them in Narnia itself that they would some day get back. You may imagine that they talked about it a good deal when they got the chance. They were in Lucy's room, sitting on the edge of her bed and looking at a picture on the opposite wall. It was the only picture in the house they really liked. Aunt Alberta didn't like it at all, and that was why it was put away in a little back room upstairs. But she couldn't get rid of it because it had been a wedding present from someone she did not want to offend. It was a picture of a ship sailing nearly straight towards you. Her prow was gilded and shaped like the head of a dragon, with a wide open mouth. She had only one mast and one large square sail, which was a rich purple. The sides of the ship, what you could see of them, were the gilded wings of the dragon, where the gilded wings of the dragon ended, were green. She had just run up to the top of one glorious blue wave, and the nearer slope of that wave came down towards you with streaks and bubbles on it. She was obviously running fast before a gay wind, listing over a little on her port side. By the way, if you're going to read this story at all, and if you don't know already, you had better get it into your head that the left of a ship, when you are looking ahead, is port, and the right is starboard. All the sunlight fell on her from that side, and the water on that side was full of greens and purples. On the other it was darker blue from the shadow of the ship. "The question is," said Edmund, "whether whether it doesn't make things worse looking at a Narnian ship when you can't get there. Even looking is better than nothing, said Lucy, and she is such a very Narnian ship. Still playing your old game, said Eustace Clarence, who had been listening outside the door and now came grinning into the room. Last year, when he had been staying with the Pentances, he had managed to hear them all talking of Narnia, and he loved teasing them about it. He thought, of course, that they were making it all up, and as he was far too stupid to make anything up himself, he did not approve of that. "You're not wanted here," said Edmund curtly. "I'm trying to think of a limerick," said Eustace. "Something like this. Some kids who played games about Narnia gradually got barmier and barmier." "Well, Narnia and balmier don't rhyme, to begin with," said Lucy. "It's an assonance," said Eustace. "Don't ask him anything about what an assy thingy gummy is," said Edmund. "He's only longing to be asked. Say nothing and perhaps he'll go away." Most boys, on meeting a reception like this, would have either cleared out or flared up. Eustace did neither. He just hung about grinning, and presently began talking again. "Do you like that picture?" he asked. "For heaven's sakes, don't let him get started about art and all that," said Edmund hurriedly. But Lucy, who was very truthful, and had already said, "Yes, I do. I like it very much." "It's a rotten picture," said Eustace. "You won't see it if you step outside," said Edmund. "Why do you like it?" said Eustace to Lucy. "Well, for one thing," said Lucy, "I like it because the ship looks as if it were really moving, and the water looks as if it was really wet, and the waves look as if they were really going up and down." Of course, Eustace knew lots of answers to this, but he didn't say anything. The reason was that, at that very moment he had looked at the waves and saw that they did look very much indeed as if they were going up and down. He had only once been in a ship, and then only as far as the Isle of Wight, and had been horribly seasick. The look of the waves in the picture made him feel sick again. He turned rather green and tried another look, and then all the children were staring with open mouths. What they were seeing may be hard to believe when you read it in a print, but it was almost as hard to believe when you saw it happening. The things in the pictures were moving. It didn't look at all like a cinema either. The colors were too real and clean and out of doors for that. Down went the prow of the ship, and into the waves, and up went a great shock of spray, and then up went the waves behind her, and her stern and her deck became visible for the first time, and then disappeared as the next wave came to meet her, and her bows went up again. At the same moment, an exercise book, which had been lying beside Edmund on the bed, flapped, rose, and sailed through the air to the wall behind him, and Lucy felt all her hair whipping around her face, as it does on a windy day. And this was a windy day, but the wind was blowing out of the picture towards them, and suddenly the wind came, the noises, the swishing of waves, and the slap of water against the ship's sides, and the creaking and over all high, steady roar of air and water. But it was the smell, the wild, briny smell, which really convinced Lucy she was not dreaming. "Stop it!" came Eustace's voice, squeaking with fright and bad temper. "It's some silly trick you two are playing. Stop it! I'll tell Alberta. Ow!" The other two were much more accustomed to adventures, but just exactly as Eustace Clarence said "ow," they both said "ow" too. The reason was that a great cold salt splash had broken right out of the frame, and they were breathless from the smack of it, besides being wet through. "I'll smash the rotten thing," cried Eustace, and then several things happened at the same time. Eustace rushed towards the picture. Edmund, who knew something about magic, sprang after him, warning him to look out and not to be a fool. Lucy grabbed at him from the other side and was dragged forward, and by this time either they had grown much smaller or the picture had grown bigger. Eustace jumped to try and pull it off the wall, and found himself standing on the frame in front of him. It was not glass, but real sea, and wind and waves rushing up to the frame as if they might to a rock. He lost his head and clutched at the other two who had jumped up beside him. There was a second of struggling and shouting, and just as they thought they had gotten their balance, a great blue roller surged up round them, swept them off their feet, and drew them down into the sea. Eustace's despairing cry suddenly ended as the water got into his mouth.